Back everybody, my name is Tucker, and in today's video I wanted to talk about the Denver Nuggets because this is a team that I've pinpointed as a potential disappointment team for this upcoming season. There's a variety of different reasons for this, but essentially I think that the Nuggets could be taking a bit of a step back this upcoming season compared to what they just did, and that's what I want to talk about in today's video. But quickly, before we get started, if you enjoy content like this, then consider subscribing. I upload twice a day, every day, all throughout the NBA offseason, so it is a great place for consistent NBA content, and we're very, very close to 100,000 subscribers. You can also leave a like rating as well on the videos. Helps me out a ton, lets me know that you're enjoying the content, and helps you get out to more people on YouTube as well. And you can hang out with me at various socials at the bottom of the screen. So with those things said, let's talk about kind of what Denver just went through and then what I'm expecting out of them this upcoming season. So the Nuggets, in a weird way, have become, they went from this like up and coming team to a real team last year, right? Like they were this interesting up and coming team that had higher seeds in the playoffs in the past, whether that be last year or the year before, and they hadn't quite proven anything at that point. They were still kind of your classic young up and coming team, good during the regular season. What are they going to do in the postseason? And then once we got to the playoffs, they made it to the Western Conference Finals, and they made themselves look like a legitimate team. They lost in the Western Conference Finals to the team that ended up winning the title in the LA Lakers, and the team that was dominant throughout the entire bubble and the playoffs. And so at that point, we just kind of penciled the Nuggets in as, okay, they're legit. This is a real team. For me, though, I do have some concerns about this roster going into this upcoming season. So the first point here is just that there's less depth right now on this roster than there was in the past, most specifically because you're losing Jerami Grant and Mason Plumlee. Now, it's not the end of the world that you're losing either of those players, especially Plumlee, because it's just a backup five, right? But he was a backup five that worked well with what they did, could move the ball around, could facilitate a little bit of rim protection, a little bit of rebounding. Not the end of the world there, but still, it's definitely a hit to your depth. And then the other one, of course, that we have to talk about is Jerami Grant. And not every point that I make here is going to be related to the loss of Grant, but I do think that it's a significant one as it relates to what helped the Nuggets make that jump. What made them go from kind of, an interesting up-and-coming team to a real contender. Now, one of those things is the fact that their players grew up, right? And they developed and they started performing better in the postseason. But the other part of that is that their defense was significantly better, and Jerami Grant had a lot to do with that, thus why he signed a 3-year, $60 million contract to go to Detroit. Now, it's not the end of the world that Jerami Grant isn't there anymore, but if you're looking specifically at reasons why this team could take a step back this year, I would point towards the loss of Grant. Because when you look at this roster, there aren't really any players that you think, oh, there's our matchup for LeBron or for Kawhi or for Paul George or Kevin Durant, whoever it may be. There's not really a really good, strong wing defender on this roster. In the past, that was Jerami Grant. That was even someone like Torrey Craig, if he could stay on the floor shooting-wise. And those types of players are gone. And now you're looking at like Jermichael Green and Paul Millsap, and there's a clear absence of a wing defender. And that was a role that Grant played and played well. And then as an off-ball defender, he was very good as well. And that kind of leads me to my next point, which is that I'm sure a lot of Nuggets fans or people that, are kind of defending the Nuggets in this scenario are thinking, well, they've got younger guys that are going to step up, and that's why they were willing to let veterans like Grant and Plumlee walk. And you're not wrong. Bol could certainly step up and be a really good backup five this upcoming season with some upside to be more than that, maybe play with Jokic at times and create, a really, really big lineup. And then Michael Porter Jr. is really the X factor here, right? Like he's the guy that should step up for this group. He's the guy that should step into that wing role and really fulfill a lot of the promise that we've been kind of waiting on from him as he gets healthier and healthier and gets more and more accustomed to the NBA game. My problem with both of those players, though, is A, they're definitely unproven. Bol especially, and I know they have some other guys that can play the five as well. But then Porter Jr., the things that we've seen from him and the promise we've seen from him are all on the offensive end of the floor, right? So even if he does step up and he fills that void on the wing, he's not going to do it on the defensive end of the floor, which is still going to be a continual issue for this group, not having that one wing defender. They've been able to score plenty in the past. Scoring has not been the issue. And will Michael Porter Jr. provide a little bit more explosiveness, a little bit more versatility, another offensive option if he fulfills that promise? Yes, absolutely. And he might have the talent and the upside of an all-star caliber player, which would be huge for this Nuggets roster. But from what we've seen from him on defense to this point, granted, he's a young player, still trying to figure out the NBA game, defense is not going to be his strong suit, and that's a hole on this roster that needs to be filled. And I don't think they have the personnel to do that right now, and that would make me nervous if you're talking about this team as a conference finals or a finals team this upcoming season. Now, Are the younger players going to continue to grow and develop, whether that's Bol Bol or Michael Porter Jr. or Jokic and Murray and everybody else on this roster? Yes, of course, those guys are going to continue to get better. And you might be pointing to some things like the fact that maybe Gary Harris will be healthier. He looked okay at times in the bubble. Will Barton should be back and healthy, a guy they didn't even have last postseason or during the bubble for the most part. And that's true. They should be a little bit healthier ideally. But unless you're really counting on like a huge bounce back athletic season from Gary Harris, I don't know where the defense comes from this roster. Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic as a pick and roll combo is about as good as it gets in the NBA. With the versatility of those two players, Murray has grown exponentially in his decision making and his shot making. I'm not worried about that part of the offense. Michael Porter Jr., I'm sure will step up and be a good player for them and hopefully learn how to play NBA defense, but he's not going to be an elite level defender, but still should be a good offensive player. Paul Millsap is a nice veteran presence. You know, Gary Harrison and Will Barton are a nice little combination there at the 2-guard spot. They have other options here on the offensive end of the floor, but defensively, I don't really see any answers to the big questions for me. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't find someone to answer those questions for them, right? Like they could certainly make a trade. There could certainly be some moves made still for this group and they can figure it out. And maybe that's what they're planning on right now. They're looking at their roster and they understand that it's not a complete group. They understand that there are still moves that need to be made and they're anticipating as they get closer to the trade deadline, making a move for a wing player that would make a significant difference on this roster or someone that really helps them out on the defensive end of the floor. And maybe that's their plan as they say, you know what, we didn't want to overpay to bring back Grant, which is probably the correct decision. 3 years, 60 is probably a lot for like a do-it-all defensive guy that can occasionally make some jump shots. Maybe they looked at it and said, you know what, let's keep our versatility open. Let's make sure that we still have these younger players on these smaller contracts, build around Jokic and Murray, and figure everything else afterwards. After maybe Harris and Barton's contracts run out, let's not just go all in for this season. Maybe that's the plan. And if that's the case, that's fine. But that still goes towards this idea that I do think they're going to be taking a bit of a step back this season. They have young players they can step up. They've got, you know, even someone like PJ Dozier maybe steps up and is a good defender for them. Or you've got, like I said, Porter Jr., Bol Bol, maybe even RJ Hampton. They've got options here, but I am nervous in terms of what they're actually going to be bringing to the floor on the defensive end of things. So as we look at possible trades for this group, they certainly have assets. I think that it's possible a team starts to get really interested in what Bol Bol could become, even if he just, you know, plays for 15 minutes a game or something this upcoming season. He could develop into a relatively significant trade asset. They have contracts to make it work with Barton and Harris. Michael Porter Jr. seems relatively untouchable at this point, but maybe that changes if, you know, if there's a missing piece here that is a really, really good wing, I don't think that they would hesitate to at least consider the idea of trading away Michael Porter Jr. because we still don't know if he's going to develop into what we hope that he will. Now, at the end of the day, despite all these negative things that I've said about Denver throughout the entire video, they're still going to be a very, very good team. And they're still a team with a very bright future. A lot of these guys are younger than people realize. And I'm not making the case against Denver as a whole, and I'm not trying to be overly negative about everything they have going on. I'm just looking at specific to what they did last season, the fact that they made it to the Western Conference Finals, compared to what they could do this year. I think there's going to be a bit of a gap there and a bit of a downgrade. Because again, the playoff run they had kind of legitimized their team to a lot of people, but they should have been out of the playoffs 2 different times in that postseason. They were down 3-1 in 2 different series and ended up coming back and winning, and all the credit in the world to them for that. And that showed a lot of maturity. It showed a lot of determination, and I fully respect that. But there's also like an alternate scenario in which the Jazz close out that series in round 1, and we're looking at Denver completely differently, because they just lost in 5 games in the first round after having a good regular season. And that might be what happens to this group this year now that they've taken a bit of a step back and they won't be as good on the defensive end of the floor. So maybe there's a trade in the works. Maybe the young players step up more than I'm anticipating. But right now, I don't have as high hopes for Denver as a lot of other people. And that's what I want to talk about in today's video. But that is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. I hope you guys have an awesome rest of your day, and I will see you all next time.